Hello, today is Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. I'm Sarah Crafassi, and this is Staying Connected. On today's podcast, I'm joined by Ben Fox, one of TC2's managing directors, to talk about how to deal with the effect of cost of living adjustments on your IT outsourcing deals. Hey, Ben, thanks for joining me to talk about this, and welcome back to Staying Connected.
Hi, Sarah. It's great to be back on Staying Connected. It's been a while since I've done one of these.
We're always glad to have you on the podcast. So the issue of cost of living adjustments, or COLA, is always a key topic in outsourcing contracts. And with COVID and recent general inflationary pressures, it seems to have become an even bigger issue in the last few years.
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. It certainly has. So traditionally, outsourcing deals don't have explicit COLA clauses, i.e. a provision that allows the service provider to increase their pricing in line with some CPI index or in line with some average earnings index. You know, the principle being that the service provider is providing a service, and under most outsourcing deals, the provider is expected to deliver operational efficiencies. You know, that might be via automation or AI or tooling or process improvements, what have you. So COLA is expected to be managed via those mechanisms, via those efficiencies, and not pass through, if you will, to the customer. But we are definitely seeing a lot of different service providers right now that seem to be really struggling with COLA. And I think what has really happened is that we've kind of gone through this perfect storm of COVID, which created such huge demand for IT resources and thus significant increases in the cost of such resources, followed then by the recent period of high inflation generally, which of course is also driving up resource costs. And so particularly for deals that were done, just before COVID or 3 or so years ago, service providers generally didn't account for the level of COLA we're seeing right now, and they're kind of struggling to deal with it, I think.
Okay, so how are the service provider struggles presenting themselves to customers?
Well, we're seeing a lot of low-level complaining, I would definitely say, from service providers about, just making less margin than they were expecting or no margin on particular deals. And while contracts almost never allow providers to simply increase their pricing merely due to margin issues, it does kind of end up seeping into business as usual activities and changes that customers need to make from time to time when the provider suddenly makes fixing their COLA problems a condition of whatever adjustment the customer needs to make. I think there can also be some issues that we see where service providers make unilateral changes in the background to how they're delivering services, changes that are not necessarily wanted by the customer, to allow the service providers kind of reduce the cost of their service delivery. That can cause some quality issues, or that can simply result in cutting a lot of corners, if you will. And outsourcing contracts, they're designed to provide some flexibility in how services can be delivered as long as the key solution attributes are adhered to and service levels are met. But no contract or no service level construct can provide complete protection from service providers making some reductions in the quality of service delivery to reduce their costs. And I'll note, Sarah, for what it's worth, that these issues really seem to come to the fore in contract renewal and extension discussions.
In what way?
Well, so, in 2024, we're seeing a lot of deals that were struck in kind of 2019, 2020. So, before the COVID and the cost of living effects I mentioned really kicked in, seeing those deals come up for renewal. And in an industry which is really used to the cost of outsourced service delivery going down from year to year, we're suddenly seeing many service providers did those deals those years ago, wanting to increase the pricing quite significantly, rather than simply extend with perhaps flat pricing or reduced pricing enabled by ongoing efficiency and continued automation levers. And that can really be quite a shock to the system for customers who just aren't expecting and aren't used to prices increasing. So the service providers, of course, completely blame COLA, completely blame inflation for this. But I think actually it's also true that deal pricing that was originally based on some quite optimistic assumptions from service providers regarding things like the volume of work that can be automated, volume of work to be made more efficient or just eliminated. I think that's also to blame. But of course, the service providers don't admit that that's part of the problem.
And what about in competitive procurements? Do we see any changing behaviors from service providers there as well?
No. We really haven't. I think generally service providers remain willing to account for COLA in their service delivery pricing, i.e. they continue to build it in and don't require any automatic COLA-based price increases over and above the agreed contract pricing. I think that's really because for go-forward pricing proposals, they know the current cost of resources and so they can just price COLA in just like they always have. I would say the only consistent exception to that is with respect to hourly or daily rate cards for additional resources. So, really for project work. So for rate cards, there's no ability for the provider to offset COLA increases on their unit rates with delivery efficiencies. So I think COLA increases are certainly reasonable in that limited space.
Got it. So, what would your advice be to a customer whose supplier is asking for a mid-contract price increase for outsourced IT services?
Well, firstly, I wouldn't have that much sympathy for the supplier. The fact is that part of the reason that a customer outsources in the first place is for the service provider to manage resource costs. So the service provider really shouldn't bring those kind of problems back to the customer. And I would also challenge the service provider to drive efficiencies in its service delivery to offset, high CPI costs and any unexpectedly high cost of resources. But I will say that in a contract extension or renewal negotiation, the customer may not have any contractual rights to extend the contract at the same pricing. So, for example, a common outsourcing contract duration is some derivation of a 3+1+1 or a 5+1+1 contract duration. So, for instance, once the original 3-year term is done, the customer can extend an extra year, i.e. one of the plus ones, and extend at the same prices. So without such rights, or if you've already used those renewal years, and if the customer doesn't have the desire or indeed the time to conduct a competitive procurement and look at alternative suppliers, it might be very difficult in your negotiations to avoid price increases.
Okay, so any tips for negotiating COLA increases when they're in such a position?
Well, I think as a general matter, it's better in outsourcing deals to not just agree to a blanket COLA clause where the service provider can automatically increase its pricing in line with some pre-agreed COLA index. It can actually often be better to just pre-agree a fixed increase for the extension period or the renewal years so that everyone can just budget for the increase knowing how much it will be, or even agree to a capped increase, i.e. the lower of the agreed CPI index and an agreed percentage cap. That's quite a common construct. And also, such CPI measures should, of course, be based on the location where the service provider resources delivering the actual services are based and reside. So COLA is very different in different parts of the world. And also, importantly, COLA increases should only apply to prices that are based on resources. For instance, don't let COLA increases apply to sunk costs, to costs for hardware, software, tools, or indeed costs for network services.
All right. Thank you very much, Ben. That was a great discussion. And if you would like to learn more about IT outsourcing deals, or if you'd like to discuss other ICT needs with Ben, me, or any of our LB3 or TC2 colleagues, please give us a call or send us an email. And you can always stay current by subscribing to Staying Connected, checking our websites, and following us on LinkedIn.